Governments seem to think that the only solution to every single problem is to spend more, whereas the simple solution for me is for governments to spend less. You can look after people and improve welfare is to earn more real income and not just transfer it from one part of the economy which is efficient to the other part of the economy which is inefficient. It all comes down to printing money at the end of the day, because you can sneak that through in an economy without people noticing it was you that did it, because the creation of more money, the immediate effect of that in an economy actually looks good.
Welcome to another RTD Interview. Today I'm excited to have returning guest, Professor John Hearn, economist, author, as well as professor, sit down with us today and join us and share his thoughts on a variety of subject matter, events unfolding in the UK, as well as the global economy and precious metals. And as always, it's good to connect with like-minded individuals that have a well-rounded viewpoint as to what's really happening so we can get a real and truthful perspective. And let's bring him in here right now. Mr. Hearn, how you doing, Professor Hearn?
Very well, thank you. Yes, generally enjoying life and taking it easy.
That's good. That's good. So as always, I appreciate you for taking time to connect with the audience and share your perspective based upon where you're sitting at now, as well as just an overall assessment as to where we're heading, given all this, economic, financial, and monetary uncertainty. But for those who might be new to the channel, never want to exclude them. So will be our fifth time connecting. And as we're going through some of the headlines here, you talk about government spending, low interest rates during the little health situation. And then we connected with Lawrence Lepard in reference to the whole fourth turning and things of that nature. MMT was always a discussion. And then, of course, fiat currencies, the failing was our last talk in 2022. So here we are now in 2025. And at this current moment, I'm curious to get a idea as to what are some things that you're keeping an eye on from where you're seated at, what concerns you, what excites you, and we'll just go right from there.
Yeah, not much excites me, I must admit, in terms of economics. The situation in the UK is very weak and around the world. And around the world, the problem is always too much government spending. We're in a situation now where governments seem to think that the only solution to every single problem is to spend more, whereas the simple solution for me is for governments to spend less, borrow less, and let markets do things and let capitalism work, rather than destroying capitalism by gradually eroding all of the things that make us better off. Because at the end of the day, we need economic growth, and economic growth only comes from the private sector, because 90% of economic growth is invention and innovation. And the last thing you ever expect of government is that they could invent anything or indeed innovate anything efficiently. Almost everything they do is inefficient, and if they actually did something efficient, it would just be by luck. So I don't like to see governments wasting all our resources. I like to see the private sector being careful. And if the private sector gets it wrong, of course, it goes bankrupt. And we lose that particular supplier because they're not doing things in the way the customer wants. But unfortunately, with government, they pump their money in, get it wrong, and think, oh, well, we must have not had enough money in, so they pump even more money in. There's no real measure of their incompetence. And they just continue thinking that if they spend more money, economies will grow. And it's exactly the opposite of that, which is why growth statistics in the UK have been very poor over the last year. Fiscal budgets designed to grow economies and make us all better off have done exactly the opposite. The Bank of England hasn't helped with its policies. So we're in a situation where both the Treasury with fiscal policy and the Bank of England with monetary policy are not really contributing to the growth of the UK economy, or indeed the long-term welfare of the UK economy, because the only way you can look after people and improve welfare is to earn more real income, not just transfer it from one part of the economy which is efficient to the other part of the economy which is inefficient.
Very poor, very good point there. And so you hinted at a lot of things that rings true for me over here in the U.S. Government involvement, excess of debt, and the absence of free market activity. And so I'm not sure about in the UK, but over here with current administration, it looks like we have a state capitalist approach where we have an administration taking actual equity stake in publicly traded companies. And so once again, that is not an ideal model as well. But it looks like, all governments are in the same boat. They have minimum options, and so more invasive policies appear to be the approach they're going to take. And so with that model that's taking place here, like, we don't see no signs of there being any solution coming from government. And so that's where do it fall on the actual person or the individual or the people themselves to be more proactive with these subject matters as well as their response to these matters?
Well, the problem is that governments only have one route. They just say, we've got to spend into the economy, we've got to spend more money, and that will solve problems. The point I've made is that it won't do that. And it will be a brave government to stand up and say, we cannot do these things. We're going to stop doing this. We're going to stop doing that. We're going to release resources because we want economies to grow. I mean, I stand up in front of my undergraduates and I say, usually responding to them, because they say, you know all about this. Why don't you get into government? Why don't you go into politics? Why don't you talk about all of these things? And I said, no one would vote for me. Because if I stood up in front of my undergraduates and said, vote for me, I cannot do this. I cannot do this. I would concentrate on this. These are the few things I can do, but I cannot do the rest. And then a person stands up next to me and says, no, vote for me. I can do that. I can do that. I can do everything. Who do you vote for? Well, you vote for the person who says they can do everything. And then when it all goes wrong, people will come back and they'll say, you wouldn't do anything. At least that person tried. So it's a lose-lose for any government standing up and saying, we want to release resources. We're going to leave it to capitalism. We're going to leave it to the people that everyone wants to hate, which are the entrepreneurs and the people who've become rich by supplying the goods and services that we actually want to buy. And we find ourselves in that situation where I cannot see any way out of this, because every year I've lived, every year I've taught economics, there's just been more and more of a gradual erosion into the marketplace and capitalism, and just taking away more restrictions, more money brought from the private sector. In the UK, over 51% of expenditure now comes from government. And I can't see this being reversed. In fact, only getting worse. Trump said the right things in terms of let's get taxes down, then said the wrong things in terms of let's spend more money. So the deficit is ballooning in America, and that causes problems, and the same in the UK. The Chancellor of the Exchequer has said we need to raise more tax to close this gap, and so they raise tax rates, which they don't understand at this stage in the economy actually lower tax revenues. So the tax revenues have got worse because the tax rates have been increased and expenditure plans have continued. So the black hole, if you like, the gap, the deficit is just growing. So we've got to have a budget soon where we're going to raise even more tax rates to raise more tax, but again, it won't do it. So the deficit will grow. And bottom line, you can only deal with deficits in one of three ways. You've got to take money away from people, so you've got to borrow money from them, or you've find yourself in a situation where you tax more, or you print money. And it all comes down to printing money at the end of the day, because you can sneak that through in an economy without people noticing it was you that did it. Because the creation of more money, the immediate effect of that in an economy actually looks good. Because today you can go out and buy things at today's prices, you can employ some more people at today's prices, and then this money filters through into the economy and firms start to expand, they start to compete for resources, their costs go up, and a year or more later you get the inflation that the government can say, on the central bank can say, the Fed, the Bank of England, like, nothing to do with us. We've been doing great policies we've been pursuing, and because the costs rise, then they blame cost-push inflation, something, as I've probably said to you many times before, doesn't exist. No such thing as cost-push inflation. You can't raise the average level of prices by putting up wages or putting up food prices or going to war or anything. It's always expanding the money supply and monetary demand faster than the rate of growth of output. That's the only cause of inflation, but it's very difficult to tie it down to the Federal Reserve or the Bank of England, who do it. And the other thing, of course, about all government spending, which is very difficult for people to understand, certainly certain modern theories of economics, the taxpayer pays for everything. So all the government spending is paid for by the taxpayer, and it's the taxpayer now, the current taxpayer pays, future taxpayers pay, the ones who are paying the interest, repaying the debt. And the third caveat to that statement is I take inflation to be a tax as well. Inflation is just a tax on the money in circulation. So that third, inflation, produces the revenue that the government needs. So bottom line is all those people who earn money, who pay taxes, pay for every bit of government spending that there ever was. So never believe those theories that come out and say, no, we don't have to raise taxation in order to spend money. Governments can spend as much money as they like. And if they ever get an inflationary situation, they can always tax it out again and stop that inflation. And in fact, that's wrong because of the time lags involved in putting money in and taking money out, with this sort of year lags, even up to 2-year lags sometimes, between a change in quantity of money and the actual inflation hitting the economy. So by the time you think we've got to do something about that, you've already caused the problem. And the worst thing you can do once you've caused inflation is to try and reverse it. You just have to stop it. If you try and reverse it, you make things even worse. So we are in a real mess. We being the whole world.
Right. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on this trade war. And so the U.S. and I guess China are going neck and neck. And this administration here is selling it as trying to, reinstate a fair balanced trade. And so you got 100% tariffs here. A couple months ago, it was 150. So just all these numbers are thrown out here. And so would you also consider this trade war or tariff narrative to be also an additional tax on the people? Because ultimately, when it comes to buying goods and services from your shelves or just your daily necessities, you're going to pay more.
It is, and it's a mistake. It's exactly the wrong thing to do, was to think of having a tariff war. The only reason for using tariffs is when you find that there's another country that's disadvantaging your exporters, perhaps in a regulatory way, stopping things coming into your country. And you can then just say, if you don't stop that, we will put a tariff on. So you use the tariff to negotiate other restrictions that are stopping your imports going. Poor old Japan. I use the example because years and years ago, Japan were building up their car industry, and they had restrictive practices which stopped imports from the UK to Japan. But of course, they wanted to sell their Japanese cars over here. So the sort of things that they did, one, they put taxes, purchase taxes on cars, and the Japanese cars were about 1 inch narrower than the European cars, and they had a different lower tax on those cars, identical to the imports, but it was much cheaper to buy the Japanese. If you lived in Tokyo and you had a foreign car, you couldn't park in any of the car parks. So these were restrictions. So go for tariffs. You say, if you don't get rid of those restrictions, we will use tariffs. Now, the mistake that Trump has made is to look at bilateral trade as if that is important. In other words, he's looked at the balance of trade between America and one other country. And he's gone, if there's a deficit here, then you're cheating us. There's something wrong here. We've got to be balanced with you as a country. And so he's attacking individual countries, which is the wrong thing to do, because it's multilateral trade that matters, not bilateral trade. And what you need is multilateral trade, which produces a current account balance on the balance of payments. If you've got that, no problems at all. So bilateral trade doesn't matter, but they've gone about it the wrong way, and they've actually gone and put tariffs up rather than just using tariffs as a negotiating thing. They put tariffs up. Now, as soon as you put tariffs up, you actually disadvantage the American consumer, because you're in a situation where the cost of producing things in America will go up, because the imports are more expensive, and if they're produced in America more expensively, you'll have to pay more. So the bottom line is it doesn't do anyone any good to have tariffs or a tariff war. And as I say, the only time that tariffs should ever be used is in part of the negotiations associated with what you consider to be unfair practices in other countries. And if you can prove those unfair practices, then you say to those countries, these unfair practices have got to stop. Otherwise, we will impose a tariff. But that hasn't happened. It's just really a case of looking at bilateral trade and say, you export too much to us and don't buy enough from us, so we're going to put a tariff. And it's been very indiscriminate and silly in the way that it's been used, and it's damaging efficient firms around the world, and it's damaging the American economy as well. None of those things you want. So all in all, a very bad policy, but it's a shout-out policy for politicians. Look what we're doing for you. We're protecting you from all of these foreign countries who are trying to sell their products here so that we're not employing people here to produce these things. It's an old story that's been repeated years and years. I'm very pleased if I buy things from other countries if they're produced better and more cheaply than here. And I'm also pleased when other countries want to buy the stuff that we do best. I'm quite happy for us to buy all our goods from other countries and sell other countries' services, because we're particularly good at providing services. So for an efficient allocation of resources, you want countries to produce what they're best at producing.
Interesting. Now, as we go through this, I call it a variety of things. I call it the great unwind. I call it the great revelation of, monetary malfeasance. And then over here we have, when it comes to gold and silver, which is starting to get a lot of momentum internationally,
Yeah.
more so than here locally. We have the
Yeah.
Western Hemisphere extremely excited about blockchain and distributed ledger technology. Got my thoughts on that. But I refer to this current movement we're experiencing now as just a flight to safety. People are looking for a way to preserve their purchasing power because they're witnessing the debasement of fiat currency as well as the destruction of everything they worked hard for. And so I just want to share with you just some graphs that I love to highlight for my viewers. And so I actually utilizing the British pound here. So over the last year, when it comes to gold, it was 2,100 pounds, or give or take. And as of today, it's 3,100 for gold. And then with silver, it was 23 pounds, beginning of the year, and now it is touch over 40-ish. And so to me, that shows that confidence in fiat is trending down and confidence is returning to sound money. Now, based upon the charts I just showed you, is this the beginning phase, or is there a potential for a cooling off of things? Can the government come in and find a way to, knock off some of that confidence to keep people in the fiat game, or introduce the digital representations of the currency, stable coins or CBDCs, or what
Yeah.
are you thinking?
Well, it's the digital currencies that are frightening people in many ways, because once central bank digital currencies are introduced, then there's a lot of control that can be managed through central government. So once you've got a CBDC, you've got no longer cash. And when you've no longer got cash, you haven't got the freedom that you had before to actually go out and buy things, because it's quite easy to program central bank digital money to make you use your money in certain ways, so that you could create a situation where you can no longer buy petrol. You've got to have an electric car. So you cannot use your currency to buy petrol. You cannot use your currency to buy anything which might be considered against the net zero and green policies. We don't want you to save too much money. We want you to spend too much money. And if you haven't spent that by the end of the month, then we're going to take it away from you. It's possible to do all those things. Now, you can't do that with cash. In the same way, you can't do that if a person's got gold or silver. So gold and silver become something that we could put in our private vault at home and still use in the future to buy what we want to buy, not be told what we've got to buy. Now, if we remain a fiat currency backed by cash, things are relatively stable at the moment. So all of the fear is about what is happening in the not too distant future. And one of the things that anyone could look at if they look carefully is this concern that we've already aired, which is having excessive government expenditure that has to be financed in a way that almost is looking now unserviceable. How can we finance all of this? And that means that you're likely, under those circumstances, the next thing that a government does when it's sort of failing in this area is to start the printing process. Now, you can observe this because as long as the statistics are out there, you just look at broad money growth. And as soon as broad money growth starts to pick up, you know that inflation's on the way in the not too distant future. If the central banks are going into central bank digital currency, you know that the same is going to happen there. If you brought up a Bitcoin graph, Bitcoin has sort of risen in a similar way, although it's stabilized at the moment. Cryptos are always highly valued or valued at zero. I get on very well with the Bitcoin community because they do invite me to talk to them because I'm very skeptical. I explain that you can go for Bitcoin as a trading asset and you can make money out of it, but don't stay in it too long because it's got no inherent value, whereas gold and silver actually do have inherent value. If gold and silver prices do dip, they won't go down to zero because people like, well, I've got a couple of cups behind me. I don't think they're silver, and I've got a gold ring and some gold on my glasses and things like that. So they're real things, whereas Bitcoin isn't. So when the bubble bursts on Bitcoin, it's got nothing going for it. And so we do have a bit fun, and it's a community that's very polite. And we chat quite often about what's right and what's wrong with Bitcoin. And I think even Trump threw out a statement which was a little bit of fun by suggesting, I never heard him say this, but someone told me he said this, that we may use Bitcoin to buy the gold out of Fort Knox and then end up with a Fort Knox of Bitcoin and central banks trading Bitcoin to settle debts between themselves. If they do, then Bitcoin's got something of a future. But the weakness of Bitcoin is it's limited to 21 million Bitcoins. And if you limit a currency, you have the opposite problem to the one we have when you have fiat almost as an unlimited currency, because fiat is always inflationary unless you really are disciplined. And that's always been the worry of people, that money is going to be devalued by inflation. Unfortunately, with Bitcoin, it's the very opposite. It's deflationary. So Bitcoin, if it's used as money, will grow in value. And because it will grow in value if it's used as money, people won't want to use it as money because it becomes an asset. Let's hold on to this. Let's make less purchases. Let's put back purchases. So all of that creates a deflationary situation. And a sound monetary situation needs monetary growth to be roughly in line with the growth in output so that you get 0, 1%, 2% maximum inflation. Things are stable. People then have confidence and people can trade. So, I'm all for, if you want me to solve all the problems of the world now, you'd force all governments to balance their budgets, and I'd force central banks to keep money growth very slow and just slightly faster than the anticipated rate of growth of output. And I would let them interfere with interest rates. I'd let interest rates rise and fall based upon market forces, not based upon any idea that any central bank has or any aspiring economist might have who's wanting to advise these central banks.
Very true. Now, in reference to that, Bitcoin and Trump's statement, over here, our politicians are very hard pressed on associating Bitcoin as a reserve asset. And so, if I bring it up here, this administration ran upon was the establishment of a strategic Bitcoin reserve, as well as other digital assets, with very little mention about our gold reserves in Fort Knox, of which I'm of the mindset that perhaps they're not really there. But we won't find out, I don't think, because that's something that our mainstream media don't want to touch. But they will remind you of the future that lies ahead in the digital space. And so we have a lot of people talking about, the U.S. is going to buy Bitcoin and put it on its balance sheet. Then the rest of the world will be forced to recognize it. And then we have Cynthia Loomis, a congresswoman here, saying that, let's do this so that China and Russia will be forced to then go buy Bitcoin because it'll be a race to Bitcoin. And so, and all this narratives that are being put out there, I call it pure propaganda, but I know where things are trending. And I'm of the mindset that, what a coincidence that all this blockchain narrative happened to be placed at the exact moment in time when the fiat debt debasement is being exposed, and the U.S. has a viable option to bring forth as a way of getting themselves out of trouble, not allowing people to go backwards towards gold and silver. Because you remove all that digital stuff in the meantime, the price of gold and silver, $4,200 and 53 silver would definitely be probably double, and then they wouldn't have the control heading into this next structure. But as far as a Bitcoin reserve, because I'd imagine at some point the UK may be forced to jump on the same train as a way out of their fiasco. Do you think it will be successful?
It could be, and I'll tell you for how. If you looked back at the gold standard after the Second World War no longer existed, but it was replaced by the gold exchange standard. And what the gold exchange standard was, that officially central banks, countries, would transfer gold to each other when they had current account deficits or surpluses. So you get gold from other central banks if you had surpluses, and you'd expand your money supply and buy more imports, and you'd have a fixed exchange rate system, and that was actually quite stable. So 45 up to 71, you had a stable situation under a gold exchange standard where gold was used to trade officially, transfer funds officially between central banks of different countries. Now you could do exactly the same. You could have a Bitcoin exchange standard. You could have a Bitcoin exchange standard whereby Bitcoin was the measure of how much one country owed another country as a result of trade deficits or current account deficits, not trade deficits if they're just goods, but current account deficits. And you could move Bitcoin around just to settle these debts. So it is actually something that could be used officially between countries and replace gold, and certainly be a mimic to the old gold exchange standard, which did create a lot of stability until 71, when we gave up with the gold exchange standard. Then, of course, inflation soared because no longer was there a constraint. It could work. I can't see it working, to be honest, but we are moving towards desperate times where people are going to come up with one solution or another. And the one thing that we all need and economies need is stability. And large current account deficits and surpluses don't provide stability. Large budget deficits, large fiscal deficits don't provide stability. So if you've got something that you can push into that space which will limit things, it's got to come from politics really, but something you could push into that space would be interesting. So I do always give the Bitcoin community a little bit of encouragement to think that they might be part of a new Bitcoin exchange standard that goes on across the world and maintains stability between countries. But I doubt it. I don't think we'll ever see that, and I think Bitcoin will gradually erode in value, and we'll all be. Think of central banks. Central banks don't really want that to happen unless they've got control over it. If they've got control over Bitcoin, they might quite like it to be in there. But if they haven't got control, then they don't really want Bitcoin there. And that's why the central bank digital currency is the thought that they will move that into this space, and if you like, scupper any chances of crypto or Bitcoin taking over as a real world currency.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Now, as we draw towards the end, last question, just came to mind, and it's a chance to, I guess, kind of put you on the spot a little bit. So, given all the wealth of knowledge you have acquired throughout your life, put yourself, what would you, based upon all the things we discussed today, go back to 20-year-old John Hearn? Give me two things that you would tell young John on how to prepare himself today, based upon today's environment, for his latter years.
Probably exactly what he has done. You see, it's don't work too hard. So no good living through a time of confiscatory taxation in one form or another. Always look for good leisure opportunities. certain ways of saving are useful, and of course gold, silver is useful. Shares, diverse shares are useful in the sense that they're real things. Companies are real, and you can sort of build up a portfolio of savings, of shares, we'll take advantage of any things. We have something in the UK called ISAs, which gave opportunities for people to save without any tax burden. And the government is just beginning to realise that there's something there that they could trawl back. So, to be honest, I would not have done anything different. I would have felt like an entrepreneurial person as a young person, but I've never incentivized in any way, shape, or form to work hard and to do things in an entrepreneurial way. You won't remember, but in the 70s in the UK, believe it, we had income tax for people who were very well off at 98p in the pound. It was 83% was the income tax rate, and 15% surcharge if the tax came from unearned income. So no one's incentivized under those circumstances. I remember, because I actually happened to be quite good at reading balance sheets and profit and loss accounts and making money theoretically. So I was always in competitions where they were called management games of one sort or another, based upon computer models, and one company would compete with another for a market. So I always, I did actually win 14 national titles over 17 years with my students, of course, not just me. My students were with me doing that. And I remember winning an oil management game, which was run by the Times. And Mobil Oil came to me and said, would you consider coming to work for us? And we looked at our relative salaries, and I was earning at the time £14,000 teaching. And they said, what would you need to come in to work for us? So I worked it out in terms of the cost of travel, the number of hours I'd have to work. And I said, I think I would need something in the region of about £70,000 income, given the confiscatory tax rates, in order to get me out of education into your company. And they said, well, that's never going to happen. That's more than our CEO earns, which illustrates to you, if you like, there was no incentive whatsoever to get out and work hard, because leisure becomes a much better substitute, which is why I've played cricket all my life and played sport, and generally enjoyed myself. I do sort of boast to my undergraduates it will never happen again, but I don't think I ever worked more than 15 hours a week all my life, and just about made enough money to tick over. So the young John Hearn would say, the old John Hearn will look back to the young John Hearn and say, yeah, we did all right, didn't we?
That's good there. That's good there. Yeah, I forgot to mention the cash ISA, as well as our retirement vehicles here with the executive order to allow 401k holders to now bring in the crypto space and all the things that they're trying to do to flush that parked currency into the system to prolong things. So yeah, that could be probably our next discussion as all this unwinds. But Professor, I as always appreciate you. Let me go ahead and just bring up some of your work where people can find your information at. So on the screen here, if you just go to myprofessorjohnhearn.org, you get a chance to see some of your work here and some of your lectures as well. So I appreciate you for checking in with me and definitely educating off audience a little bit more and just giving them a different perspective based upon what you're experiencing in the UK. So Professor, as always, look forward to connecting with you. Thank you for joining us on RTD Interviews.
Pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to speaking to you again. Cheers.